Let's see if today the connection works okay. Yesterday.
Oh, I hope.
Yeah. Yesterday but it was a little bit strange when I was about to speak. Our internet started going on and off, on and off. When I finished, the internet was okay.
Figured. Okay, we're live on Facebook.
Okay.
And yeah, I love the greetings. Do you want to have people make greetings, Cindy?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, I was reading someone else's, but we could write our own.
Yes, please do.
Prayer says we all look so beautiful. I know we're on Facebook, but
thank you. Back at you.
Welcome, everyone. We're going to be starting at exactly 6 o'clock with a video. Please introduce yourself in the chat box so we know who's online. Thank you for attending.
Great, Briar's here too.
Oh, see, I have somebody from the Philippines, my good friend Jolene.
oh, nice.
So it's 4 o'clock in the morning for her.
That's commitment.
Moon, our friend from the electrical workers in Mexico is online, Facebook.
Oh, beautiful. Oh, nice. Hola, amigo. I'm going to be on Facebook in a second.
And welcome to Lenny Reeves, my co-chair from WELF.
Great. I also reached out to Carolyn in case she makes it.
Good afternoon. And on behalf of the US Women in Cuba Collaboration, I would like to welcome you to Women on the Front Lines, celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Federation of the Cuban Women and the 20th anniversary of the US Women in Cuba Collaboration. My name is Cindy Domingo, and I'm the chair and co-founder of the US Women in Cuba Collaboration. I want to especially thank Deborah Goldman for that wonderful video that you just saw opening our webinar that showed you some of the wonderful highlights of our work. But in no way does that film reflect the breadth and the depth of the work we have done over the past 2 decades. Deborah is a member of our National Steering Committee of our organization, and for me, that video gives me great pride and joy of the work we have done in collaboration with the Federation of Cuban Women and other organizations over the years. And in particular, we are proud of the work that we did with the campaign to free the Cuban Five during the years of their incarceration in the United States. We were honored to meet many times with the wives and mothers of the Cuban Five to strategize on how to gain their freedom. And the mothers and wives have remained near and dear to our hearts and showed us what real courage is in the face of great adversity. But in the end, we won. First, I want to acknowledge the co-sponsors of this webinar and thank them for their support and help in reaching many of you who may or may not know of our work or the work of the Federation of Cuban Women. First, I'd like to thank our sister organization, who many of us are also members of, and where many of us started our Cuba work. And that is the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and the Cuba and the Bolivarian Alliance Issues Committee. And my co-chair, Lenny Reeves, is on the webinar also, a great friend of Cuba. I also want to thank the National Organization of Women's Global Feminism Task Force, of which Jan Stroud, who will speak later, is very active in, and LELO, a legacy of equality, leadership, and organizing. Code Pink, Gallatin Valley Friends of Cuba, and I want to especially thank Amy Leong, our tech person, and May Lim, who gets the word out for us and does our e-newsletters. Without these 2 young women, it would be very difficult to change into this new form of meeting and informing people of our work. I'd like to go over the program, which will run for an hour and a half about. And our first speaker after I finish will be the ambassador, the Cuban ambassador to the United Nations, Ambassador Ana Silvia Rodriguez. And then after her, we will have a video of the representative from the Federation of Cuban Women in their International Affairs Office. And then next we'll have a presentation about the US Women in Cuba Collaboration, what our work has been and what our mission is. And then we're going to take a short break to have a short cultural video. And then we're going to transition into a section on our work with the Cuban lesbian, bisexual, and transgender movements, which will also include a presentation by a member of Santiago, Cuba's Las Isabellas group, Dai Preval. And then we'll end with an action section, because what is education unless we are moved to take action? Hold on for a minute. We have a little dog that's excited. I also want to note that we would like to dedicate this program today to 2 dear friends. One, a friend of Cuba, a longtime member of the US Women in Cuba Collaboration, who passed away 2 years ago and traveled with me and Moon Vasquez to Cuba many times. Angel Gilliam, today is her 2nd anniversary of her death. She was a friend, sister, and comrade who dedicated many decades of her life working to end the US blockade against Cuba and working to radically change US foreign and domestic policy. She took a deep interest in the fight against racism here in the United States, as well as in Cuba. In her trips to Cuba on the delegations that I brought, she was inspired by the Cuban people and their dedication to the country's ideals, to the people's country's ideals and principles. And I want to say Angela Gilliam, presente. The second person I want to acknowledge who passed away in the last couple of years was Isabel Moya. Many of you know Isabel as the editor of Mujeres, and was doing groundbreaking work around the issue of violence against women. We met her a number of years ago, and likewise, we were inspired by her work and her tenacity. And we co-presented in New York at the Latin American Studies Association and enjoyed her company, as well as her husband's, as well as her intellect and commitment, in which we were so inspired. And again, I say Isabel Moya, presente. I want also to note that many of us are mourning the loss of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. As we celebrate this woman and her work, who fought for women's rights and equality, it is only right that her name be mentioned here today as we celebrate the work of the Federation of Cuban Women and what the FMC has been able to accomplish over the last 60 years under the Cuban Revolution. The FMC, with its 4 million members of women and girls over the age of 14, representing an astounding 91% of that population, has been about the advancement of a women's rights agenda and the equality of women. As we face a continued rollback of women's rights in the United States under the Trump administration and the Christian-led right-wing movements, Cuban women under the leadership of the FMC have been able to attain some of the highest representation of women in the scientific, political, and educational fields. 71.7% of those that practice medicine are women. Let me say that again. 71.7% of those that practice medicine are women. 65% of university graduates are women, and 53.22% of parliamentarians are women. In many of the fields, women are represented. In the professional fields, women are represented by over 50%. Due to the excellent medical system that includes reproductive health care, Cuban women have the lowest infant mortality rate in all of Latin America and the lowest in the world, and amongst the lowest in the world and the Caribbean. And they have the most generous maternity leave of up to 1 year, with a great portion of that being paid leave. And their rights are enshrined in their constitution. And it is because of these amazing accomplishments and the role of FMC in educating, organizing, advocating, and implementing holistic programs that we formed the US Women in Cuba Collaboration 20 years ago. We did it so that other women could understand that another world is possible and that that other world for women exists in Cuba. Our annual delegations to Cuba have been for the purposes of opening the eyes, minds, and hearts of women and the men that we have also taken with us. Our delegations have learned what it takes, what it is like to challenge patriarchy, and that the results of dismantling patriarchy is true empowerment of women and girls, as well as the empowerment of their whole family and men. For us in the United States, the trip reminds us of what we are fighting for. Each day, women and girls in the United States are experiencing additional attacks in our rights, ranging from constantly fighting to renew and fund the Violence Against Women's Act, and now with Justice Ginsburg's death, our right to choose, our right to control our bodies, our right to abortion is under the greatest attack that we've ever experienced. Cuban women don't have to worry about that right. They won that right, and it is protected by their constitution. It is because of these accomplishments that our government has had a blockade against Cuba for 60 years, and especially for women and girls without knowledge, without truth, we can be held captive by our own minds of not knowing that the world can be different. We hope that in this next hour or so, you will also be inspired by the work of the Federation of Cuban Women and join us in our work to build solidarity between the women of the United States and women of Cuba. So let me please now introduce Ambassador Ana Silvia Rodriguez, the Cuban ambassador to the United Nations. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And let me first thanks the organizer for putting together this wonderful celebration and all the participants for your company this afternoon. I would also like to thank the Federation of Cuban Women and the US Friends for this wonderful idea. The immense work of the Cuban Revolution cannot be understood neither in its early years nor now, without considering the valuable contribution of women of several generations. There is not a single success of the revolution in which the work of the Cuban women is evident, nor can the full participation that women have achieved in all areas of the political, economic, and social life of our country be understood, except as a result of the revolution itself. Before 1st January 1959, Cuban women who were always alongside men in our struggle from independence and emancipation continue to be relegated to the background in the political, economic, and social life of the nation. But everything changed forever with the triumph of the Cuban Revolution. The work of the revolution has continuously focused on recognizing and protecting women's rights, creating conditions that guarantee gender equality and empower them in all areas. And one cannot speak about the advancement of women towards equality in Cuba without mentioning the Federation of Cuban Women. The establishment of the FMC at the proposal of Vilma Spin was considered by Fidel Castro himself as a revolution within the revolution. The Federation of Cuban Women is the mass organization that brings together all women in the country from the age of 14. And it develops policies and programs aimed at achieving the full exercise of equality in all areas and levels of life. Its main objective is the incorporation of women into society and employment, as well as into the program of social and economic changes in Cuba. About the FMC, the Commander-in-Chief Fidel Castro said, and I quote, "Women are a tremendous political force, and today, more than ever, the revolution needs the support of women. As we face more difficult times, more support is needed. We cannot allow the women to be discouraged, to feel relegated, and to feel that there is no longer the same ardor in the struggle for justice." End of quote. The current historical and cultural context allows identify women's participation in other social roles, talking about contribution, empowerment and social inclusion, equal opportunities and access, assuming important positions in the various levels of management and in the political life, especially in the legislative body. Below, now we share with you several official statistics where this is unevident. In Cuba, women have the same rights as men, which they exercise without any obstacle, and they benefit from the same national health and education system, both universal and free. Cuban women decided on their bodies, as well as on the number of children and when to have them, for which they have family planning and sexual and reproductive health services, which are also free. Regarding employment, women and men receive equal payment for work of equal value. Cuba laws protect the right of women to a decent employment and non-discrimination at work or in their remuneration. In the public sector, women make up 49% of the workforce. In other sectors, women are the vast majority, as was mentioned before. For instance, they represent 78% of prosecuting attorneys, 77.5% of professional judges, and 66% of judges of the Supreme Court. Therefore, we can say that the administration of justice in Cuba is mainly in the capable hands of women. Women also play a main role in the scientific and technical development of the country. They constitute more than 60% of higher education graduates and 53% of those who work in science and 48% of scientific and researchers. So therefore, it's not nor there be developing in Cuba without the decisive contribution of women. Another sign on how much Cuba has advanced in terms of gender equality and women's empowerment is their participation in the political life of the country and in managerial positions. Cuba ranks second in the world regarding the amount of parliamentary women. It's only one country that is before us, that is Rwanda, also another developing country from the south. Cuban women make the 53.22% of our parliament and hold 2 of the 3 positions of this body and constitute also 47.8% of the Council of State. In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, Cuban women have also been in the front line of the battle. Female doctors, nurses, students, and social workers have taken care of the health of the people and identified vulnerable cases. Female farmers and workers have produced food for all. Female essential workers have never stopped working despite the limitation of the impact of the pandemic. The Cuban vaccine against the COVID-19 has the contribution of prominent female scientists who put their talents and heart into it. And their contribution is not limited to the Cuban territory. On the contrary, a significant number of the thousands of collaborators that make up the Cuban medical brigades of the Henry Reef contingent, which has been deployed in 39 countries and territories to support the fight against the pandemic, are women. In fact, just as an example, the brigade sent by Cuba to Trinidad and Tobago in this context is composed exclusively of women. As can be seen, Cuba has made undeniable progress towards gender equality over the past 60 years. However, recent research such as the National Gender Equality Survey shows that there is still challenges to overcome in order to achieve equity in various areas. There is still wide difference in the labor participation of men and women, and issues related to violence against women, teenage pregnancy, inequity in the equal participation in household chores and childcare, activities which are considered to be women's activity are also discussed. The achievement in the advancement of women have been possible thanks to the determination of the Cuban people. They have been achieved at the cost of great sacrifices, despite the impact of the economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed by the US government against my people for 6 decades. The blockade, which is an unjust and a criminal at its core, is a flagrant violation of the human rights of all Cubans, including women, and is the main obstacle to our economic and social development. Therefore, the blockade makes it difficult for Cuba to continue advancing in these and other goals. And at the same time, it is worth to mentioning that the blockade has not been weakened or relaxed during the COVID-19 pandemic. Quite the opposite. In the midst of the pandemic that has disrupted the life of the entire world, and in which the sense and the spirit of solidarity should prevail, the United States government has decided to continue to intensify its policy and hostility against Cuba. That is why it's so important, particularly in this difficult context, the work of the solidarity carried out by all of you, all of the friends of all over the world, in favor of the lifting of the blockade and the normalization of the relation between our two countries. A normal relation between our countries would benefit both people. One wonders, for instance, how many of the thousands of people who have fallen ill and died from COVID-19 in the United States could have benefited from Cuban medicine and the expertise of our country in dealing with, with major epidemics, which has been recognized by the international community. Unfortunately, this has not been possible due to the bilateral dynamics imposed by the current government administration. To conclude, I just wish to thank you once again for your friendship with Cuba and the effort you make to bring our troops to the US Society, in which there are many people of goodwill who we know would prefer a better relationship between our two countries. Cuba might not have much material wealth, but it does have three things that, in my opinion, are themselves great wealth. We have the Cuban people, the ideals we have defended and will defend it at any cost, and our friends in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now you see why we are so inspired, by the Federation of Cuban Women and women throughout Cuba that we have talked to and seen. Next, I want to bring on a video with Gretel Morante Rosette with the International Affairs Office at the National Office of the Federation of Cuban Women. You know, because of the travel blockade, we have great difficulty both in terms of getting representatives of the FMC to come to the United States, as well as now they are blocked from using Zoom. So many times when we have invited members of the FMC or other women in Cuba, from Cuba, they have not been able to get visas. And we usually have an empty chair to represent that their voice is not being heard because of the US blockade. And so we are happy that we were able to get a videotaped message from Gretel to further explain the vision and the work of the FMC. So welcome to Gretel, who hopefully is watching on Facebook and will be able to see our webinar.
Dear friends, the Federation of Cuban Women greet the celebration of this meeting in honor to 60th anniversary of our organization. My name is Gretel Morante Rosette and I am a Foreign Affairs of the Cuban Women Federation. The Cuban Women Federation is a national social organization that was created on August 23, 1960. Thanks to support and dedication to Vilma Espín and Fidel Castro. The responsibility for this task was assigned to Vilma Espín Gillois, who since its creation led the organization. Since the very beginning of revolution, our eternal commander-in-chief, Fidel Castro, said, "Women in Cuba is a revolution within another revolution." The Cuban women consider that the revolution is the first equality program for Cubans. Since its establishment on August 23, 1960, the Federation of Cuban Women has designed its objectives the prevention work with the fundamental action with the women and the family, based on an important social and education work. An effective as essential objective in the work of prevention and social care from the FMC, where the house focus on women and the family, a counseling house, a meeting place to work, think, learn, share, enjoy, train, receive guidance and support through some professional and specialists. It has three main lines: individual counseling, group counseling, and job trainer where course, seminar, workshop, people for the community are held. The Cuban Women Federation is a clear expression of unity of all the Cuban women. We contain that more than 4 million of affiliates, that it represents more than 91% of the women under 14 years old. We can proudly say that today women in Cuba enjoy the full exercise of human rights. Our social projects guarantee the access of all human beings to education, culture, health, and especially attention to people in a universal way and free, without exclusion by sex, skin color, or religion. Referring to the issue of equality, non-discrimination, and gender perspective, the Cuban Constitution dedicates a chapter with several articles, in particular the 41, 42, and 43, to establishment. The provisions related to equality, equal rights, and duties are guaranteed for all citizens, allowing all forms of discrimination. Remember that Cuba was the first country to sign and the second to ratify the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. In terms of labor rights, it is worth emphasizing that we Cubans receive the same salary for work of equal value. From our experience, to achieve the equality of rights and opportunities between men and women, it is necessary to develop a real culture for equality. That is the creation of the appropriate material infrastructure, social development, and also the participation of women. Gender mainstream in Cuba reflects the political will of the government, which has fostered the strengthening of mechanisms and regulations integrated in a system that recognize the common and the specific of gender perspective regarding the situation of men and women in the society. I think that our structure in all the levels helps us to know what is the problem of each woman. The grassroots level is a particular center for the Federate. The Federation of Cuban Women has been recognized by the government and the society as a national mechanism for the advantage of women due to its extensive work at the grassroots level, its role in the introduction of gender concept in the institutional agenda and the public policies, its work for the complete integration of women to economical, social, and political and cultural life in the country. The Cuban Women Federation has a legislative power. This condition to bring us the possibility to promote laws and public policy with gender perspective. Another important moment in the process of the introducing gender mainstream in public policy was the adoption of the decree law in 1997 of the National Plan of Action of the Republic of Cuba to follow up of the 4th UN World Conference on Women in Beijing 1995. This national plan of action systematized what had been achieved up to that moment and the project for the future. The FMC has get a special consultative status with ECOSOC at the United Nations since 1997. This facilitates our participation in the Council session and also its functional commission, fundamentally in the Commission of the Status of Women and the Human Rights Council. It is also enabled us to present periodic oral and written contributions regarding to work of our organization. The Federation of Cuban Women is also a member of many international movements and organizations, such as the Women International Democratic Federation, the Conference of the NGO, the International Council of Social Welfare, and the World Women March, among others. The Federation of Cuban Women coordinates the regional office of the International Democratic Women Federation to organize the work of the women organization in Latin America and the Caribbean. The work of the FMC and the Cuban Women Advance has been consolidated in spite of the unjust politic of economic, commercial, and financial blockade effects imposed by the government of the United States to Cuba that has a particular impact in the women and their families. Cuba is ours. It belongs to the Cuban people, and we will continue as an example of the free and sovereign nation. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Gretel, and I hope you're watching. Thank you for your message and the difficulty that she went through to make that message, along with her sisters at the FMC during the period of COVID. So, Gretel talked about the Commission on the Status of Women and doing work around the United Nations. And our next section is going to expand on many areas of work that we've done with the Federation of Cuban Women, as well as other work we've done in support of Cuban women and to educate women coming and men from the United States. So now I would like to move into the section about the work of the US Women in Cuba Collaboration and invite two very special people in our work. The first one is my dear friend and sister, Jan Strout, and she often goes in Cuba by Juanita Strout. Jan Strout is co-founder of US Women in Cuba Collaboration and is, from the very beginning, a National Steering Committee member of the US Women in Cuba Collaboration, as well as a co-founder leader of the Gallatin Valley Friends of Cuba based in Montana. Jan has led many delegations to Cuba, Mexico, Nicaragua, and Venezuela since 1988, while initiating related education and solidarity campaigns, and has presented and written widely on these topics. And I'm always glad to co-present with Juanita because of her vast knowledge about Cuba and Venezuela. Our second presenter in this section is Nataka Moore, is a licensed clinical psychologist with a private practice that focuses on Black women's health. She is a full professor at Adler University and has been on the faculty for 14 years. She has also been involved in numerous local and international work focused on women and social justice. And she is also serves on the National Steering Committee for the US Women in Cuba Collaboration. So I welcome my two sisters to present about the work of the US Women in Cuba Collaboration.
Cindy, thank you so much. It is such an honor to be following our Cuban compañeras, as well as to be in the circle of the members of the collaboration. 20 years is a long time. And I think I'm doing this because I might be one of the oldest of the 20 years, and that's an honor as well. We want to, both Nataka and I will be sharing this time. We'll be sharing this time to highlight these areas. We want to briefly say the mission and vision of our collaboration. That was forged in September of 2001, shortly before 9/11. It grounds us with great seriousness and responsibility. And you'll also hear we've had some fun along the way. We want to say briefly why Cuba, why women, and what that each means to both of us, Nataka, myself. And then we want to speak specifically about our three campaign areas, mostly looking at these delegations and what they do, what they've accomplished, what they've challenged us around, and the power of the solidarity and relationships with the Cuban women and people, the Federation of Cuban Women, and all of the ways that our lives have changed in such profound ways because of that. The second area of our campaigns is the reality of Cuban women's lives. We felt so important about that because of the information blockade in the United States, that very few people have a chance to know what the reality of Cuban women's lives have been about. We want to say how we've looked at that and addressed it, again, in solidarity with Cuban women. And lastly, we want to talk a little bit about our work in areas of congressional and legislative advocacy, working directly through all of the campaigns, but specific focus on working to change the US policy toward Cuba, the cruel and inhumane policy toward Cuba of a full-on blockade, and wrap it up with a few thoughts about what it all means. So I'll begin with our mission is to build a strong US women's movement dedicated to ending the US government blockade of Cuba and to creating mutually beneficial US-Cuba relations. Our work is rooted in the concept of universal human rights, racial and economic justice, and women's rights. And as I said, we were founded just before 9/11. Who would have thought and who would have known, with some very diverse and accomplished women feminist organizers, of course, Cindy Domingo, myself, Shad Reinstein, Tammy James, and Sherry Riles. But that's just the beginning of the hundreds of women that have been involved and men who are allies of our work here and in Cuba and in other parts of the world. From 3 organizations, WILF, you've heard about, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and the various committees that have lifted up Cuba and Latin American work. With LILO, you've heard about, had an Every Woman's movement, I think it still does, and they had some amazing delegations on their own to Cuba, and a group that I helped co-found in New Jersey called Hermanas. I'm hoping some of our New Jersey compañeras and compañeros are listening. But we met to bring women's voices and perspectives to the focus and to the table of women's rights, social, economic, and racial justice organizations, and peace and global justice, to create a network of these allied organizations. We weren't trying to duplicate, we wanted to build and strengthen what we could all do together based on our movement building mission. And this context of timing framed a need for human security to be lifted up and not endless wars and militarism. And that was very powerful for us because a lot of us came out of peace movements and other social and feminist organizations. And then lastly, on my part here, why women, why Cuba? For me, it was my first trip in May of 1990. I'm on my 30th anniversary, I can't believe it, with a small 8-woman delegation from New Jersey, known as Hermanas, started in Nicaragua with our connections with the feminist movement there, AMLAI, that showed me the power of why women's human rights needed to be at the center of economic, social, political, and cultural development, that policy and laws without social protections really cannot be fulfilled. And Cuba blew my mind, opened my eyes to that as a feminist organizer since I barely came of age. And that Cuba had been and is moving toward what we might call today a feminist economy that is based on indivisible, universal human rights that we just heard so much about from our Cuban compañeras and from Cindy at the beginning. So I'm not going to repeat all that. But we also found that Cuba was committed to eliminating all forms of discrimination and violence, especially based on gender, race, and sexual rights, had a proactive, comprehensive approach to preventing, and with human dignity and not blaming the victims, addressing social problems. Wow, that was so important and fundamental, not shaming and blaming. And that women, especially the most vulnerable in the United States, could benefit from and exchange with Cuban women about the challenges, opportunities, and solutions. And as we struggle today in the United States to ratify both an Equal Rights Amendment and the CEDAW Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which Cuba was the second country to ratify, here in the United States. Here was a model for both my feminist values and vision and a deeper understanding about the cruelty of US foreign policy beyond what I did to try to stop the Vietnam War, and the impacts that we've learned of their our foreign policy's economic blockade on Cuba. And also out of that grew a deeper commitment to transform that US foreign policy. And let me turn it over to Nataka.
Okay, thank you, Jan. And I just want to say hello to everyone out there. Thank you for joining us on this webinar. So what I want to first answer is why women, why Cuba? And in thinking about this, why women, I would say it's my birthright. Why women? It's for the resistance and resilience that my ancestors have shown in this country. I would not be here if it wasn't for the resistance and resilience of Black women. Why women? To continue the work of my elders, that being Harriet Tubman, that being Maya Angelou, Zora Neale Hurston, Fannie Lou Hamer, who says, "Ain't I a woman?" Why women? Because of Breonna Taylor and the fact that the police who killed her are still free. Why women? For all of those reasons and more, truly it's because it's my birthright to keep pushing these issues forward and to honor my ancestors and my elders who've done all this incredible work. Why Cuba? Because all the things that the ambassador talked about, Cindy, Jan, the fact that Cuba was the first to sign, second to ratify CEDAW, the fact that we have women representing medicine, representing the parliament, women in the workforce, doing and pushing all these amazing things that have impact on families, on communities, on children. I wanted to understand and learn more about that. It comes to mind, even as I look at 71.7% practice medicine. Of course, that goes along with the fact that women also have some of the lowest infant mortality rate in Cuba. Of course, that's connected. As a Black woman, am thinking about those statistics, I'm thinking about the US, how Black women have 2 to 3 times the maternal mortality rate as white women in this country. So of course, those things are connected, and just thinking about women's issues and how important it is for our lives, truly. So I wanted to understand the framework in Cuba, and I also wanted to know what that also meant for intersecting identities. I wanted to know what that meant for Black women. I wanted to know what that meant for lesbian women, for Black lesbian women. I wanted to know what that meant for trans women. I wanted to know what this meant when we look at women through intersectionality. So that's, for me, why women, why Cuba. And Jan, I'll pass it back over to you.
We're going to do a lot of passing back. Beautiful. You can see why I wanted to meet this woman, Nataka, and travel with her. And we had a chance to do that in 2013, and then co-led another mind-blowing delegation in 2015. She's going to highlight that. But I want to say a little bit about some of the goals that we've had with our delegations that Cindy framed so elegantly at the beginning. And they have been very diverse in our themes, but yet we seem to circle back to our centering, which I'm always thrilled about, which is women advancing gender equality, racial justice, and sustainable community development, learning with and sharing with all of the partners in Cuba. They have had many different impacts and many different learnings from diverse themes, participants, programs, site visits, solidarity actions, and the commitments of our participants upon return to the United States and to their communities. These connections and relationships within the delegation participants and between Cuban and US women and peoples around the world, the Cuba modeling the world solidarity that was referenced by our previous compañera, especially in health and education, just are lifted up as a result of our ability to travel to Cuba, as well as you'll hear a little bit more about being able to bring Cuban women to the United States to speak for themselves. But our delegations, I think, have empowered women to think critically about US foreign policy, other models of economic, social, and political practices and structures that are not really readily available here. That this travel made this possible, which is why we also worked to raise funds for travel solidarity scholarships so that the diversity of women could participate, never perfectly and never enough, but it was always part of our goals. That we also required, but we called it asked, our delegation members to commit to 1 year upon their return in ways that they chose to share what they learned from their experiences in Cuba, primarily in their own communities, which range from report backs, newsletters, presentations to classes, conferences, community groups, which range from the United Nations NGO Commission on Women in New York to the National Organization for Women, to WILF, to the Latin American Studies Association, Insight, US Social Forums, along with media interviews, writing letters to the editor, and editorials themselves, meeting with congressional representatives and staff, and that combined, our delegations had and have, we hope for the future, powerful impacts to both women individually, group solidarity, and learnings with and from the Cuban people. And I want to share a few examples too, few stories that you've heard much about the kinds of delegations and why as well from Cindy. Every year we've tried to take women to Cuba, sometimes more than once a year, until this past year. Our last one we each had in May of 2019. They've been co-led either by Cindy and I, or Cindy or myself, pretty much, along with many, many co-leaders that we've met through other delegations. So we've really tried to incorporate as much as we can a diverse leadership model with as many women of diverse identities as possible. In early years, for myself, starting in 1990, I had a chance to meet Cindy in 1998 on a delegation. No, I'm sorry, in 1999, because we were each in Beijing in 1998 in follow-up conferences from the Beijing conference in 1995. But don't worry about the years. I'm not going to. There's too many of them. But mainly, Cindy and I met and had a chance to go to Cuba in 1999, where we basically were traveling under a very fascinating time in Cuba, which was about the reality of women's lives and tourism. Tourism was coming in as a major economic driver after the special period that had taken over much of Cuba's, impacting much of Cuba since 1990 at the time of the implosion of the former Soviet Union, and 80% of Cuba's aid and trade was from that period of time. So I personally witnessed on some WILF delegations and others before we started working through the collaboration, the impacts of both the ramping up of the US blockade against Cuba at the same time the economic pressures were there. But by the time we got there, we had a chance to see the many ways that Cuba was responding to both US policy and those economic pressures. Some of the later delegations, 2013 and 2017, were women advancing gender equality, racial justice, and sustainable development. We'd almost always have a base in Havana, but we always wanted to try to travel to another province. So we were seeing more of the rural parts of Cuba and the different provincial highlights from each of these. And we were able to
Oh, I think we lost Jan.
Okay, well, I think we did, but you know, what I can do is, you know, I can talk about some of the importance of the right to travel and our delegations. And so I can talk a little bit about my experience in that space. So, you know, I tell people, so I've gone to Cuba twice. I've gone in 2013 and I've gone in 2015. And one of the things that I always tell people, and each time I've spent 9 days, I feel like I received a whole degree in my time of being there in terms of all the things that I've learned in those delegations that I've taken back with me in the teaching of the classroom, that I've shared with family and friends, that I've taken with me in doing work in Liberia and doing work in Madagascar around women's issues. And so I think about this quote of this woman from Papua New Guinea that sticks with me as a psychologist. She says that, you know, one of the things that they talk about in Papua New Guinea is when they look at health, they said that they don't ask what is wrong with the person, but what did the community not give the person? And when I went to Cuba, I felt like Cuba lived that way of thinking. How do we think about prevention when it comes to health? How do we think about well-being? How do we think about mental health? And how does that impact the community? And as a psychologist, that was important to me. So when I think about visiting the maternity hospitals and seeing the way that women were taken care of and the way that babies were taken care of at day 0 before they were even born, that was significant. The fact that in communities, there was a focus on making sure that folks didn't feel isolated as a way to increase mental health and well-being was important to me. Thinking about the role that physicians play in communities and the way in which they address and prevent disparities, health disparities, is important to me. We see now in the US with COVID that due to health disparities, Black and Brown people are impacted by COVID due to having health disparities. So thinking about how countries address these issues through prevention is really important to me. So I feel like I learned a lot. And so now I'm taking that knowledge in the classroom. I'm challenging my students. When I go to Madagascar, I'm working on what postpartum depression looked like for rural Malagasy women. And I'm taking the framework of a lot of things that I learned that works in Cuba and how Cuba addresses these issues into my own framework and the work that I continue to do. And that I got that perspective because I was able to travel, because I was able to learn, because I was able to connect and talk to people. That's what's important. But equally so, we also had Cuban women come. I had the opportunity of having Cuban women come and visit my university and also come to my home. And what I would say, what is so important about that is that, as Jan said earlier, that these women had the chance to speak their own truth. We know that Audre Lorde says that it is important and revolutionary for you to speak your own truth, to not be silent. And I think that that's what these women have the chance to do. They were able to talk about their experiences, and obviously it's counter narrative to some of the narratives that folks have heard before talking with these women, and expanded people's perspective, and that's important. So, you know, I would say as a result of these connections, of sharing these experiences, I've been able to work with Caridad Nusa to publish a paper. I've been able to write and connect with people and share experiences and learn. So I think the work that we've done with pushing forward our campaigns of delegations and traveling has been significant and instrumental in expanding perspectives and optics to do important work.
Thank you, Nataka.
I think I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes. Okay.
Excellent. So beautiful words, Nataka, and a great save. Let me just add a few more. And I think a couple of other ways that we've had impacts from our delegations have also been, again, the opportunity to meet Cuban women throughout our travels and also participate in international women's conferences that Professor Norma Vasallo has been organizing, Women in the 21st Century. It gave us a chance to learn about the issues that Cuban women found most important, but we also were invited to do some workshops that help build partnerships between Cuban women and the women on our delegations for common projects, greater understanding, and strengthening those ties. I think that was really important. Of course, the relationship with the Federation of Cuban Women, both at the national level in the provinces, brought us so many best practices, ways that we could bring back to our own organizations, and be able to share both, again, their realities and accomplishments. And also created projects. We had a number of them, we still do, and thanks to virtual opportunities, they will continue in solidarity. At the same time, we also were able to bring, I'm just going to not repeat myself, the reality of Cuban women's lives through speaking tours. The ability to start with speaking tours that share the perspectives, experiences, and expertise in a variety of communities, states, settings, and audience of Cuban women, which really helped to dispel a lot of the myths and break that disinformation blockade here in the United States. We had multi-city, multi-state tours, starting actually in 1998 with the La Guinera Women's Empowerment and Housing Project with Fifi and Teresa. We were able to have a first FMC visit with Alicia Gonzalez and Aurelis Santana in 2002. We really had one of our biggest tours thanks to Catherine Murphy, who is, of course, a film director of the amazing Maestra film that documents women's experiences during the Cuban 1961 literacy campaign that basically eradicated illiteracy in Cuba. And she was able to bring one of our dear friends and a profound leader, Norma Guillard, who is also a psychologist. We know many psychologists. We're very glad about that in Cuba and the United States, but that she was a brigadista at the age of 15 and participated in that literacy campaign that is documented in Maestra. So the film, Catherine and Norma crisscrossed the country, came all over to participate in states like my own, in Bozeman, Montana, and several other sites where they probably were reaching 1,000 people alone in our state and thousands more across the country. They spoke at conferences about literacy, about racial justice, about the powerful work that's being done in the Appalachian area and in bigger cities everywhere. And those speaking tours really were able to allow these Cuban women to speak for themselves. We also had Professor Norma Vasallo, who, again, I mentioned had been sponsoring these international conferences with women around the world in Havana, but we were able to bring her here again on another multi-state, multi-city presentations on the status of Cuban women, on Cuba's changing economy, on the impacts of the blockade on women, Cuban women and families to great numbers, and especially because she's head of the Women's Studies Department at the University of Havana, it gave us great opportunity to cement and build relationships with other faculty and students in the United States around topics and joint collaborations, which we encourage everywhere. And I would say last but not least in these examples and highlights were the work that we've been able to do with ELAM, the Latin American School of Medicine. Their ability to be in service in global health solidarity with the world, not only with students from the global south, but the 200 students that have been able to get free medical scholarships and come back and share the medical and health knowledge with their communities, allowed us to be able to sponsor those US students to speak from their own experience as well as the recent graduates. But we recently had the opportunity in Montana to have Dr. Melissa Barber, who is the medical coordinator through IFCO Pastors for Peace, visit all of the 7 tribal colleges and universities in Montana, because we are dedicated to increasing their opportunity to receive that free medical education and take it back to their tribal nations. But I want to conclude the examples with a very important one, because we have been committed to racial justice and led by women of color in the collaboration all along. And the tour of Eric Corvalon's national speaking tour and his groundbreaking film Raza, or Race, is the last of our many important tours, and one of the most important. And that finally, in terms of what we hoped that this had accomplished, is the ability for, again, not only women to speak for themselves, but to be able to have opportunities to meet again with numerous and important folks. And lastly, the congressional work, I'll just conclude very briefly, the empowerment, again, women on our delegations to be able to communicate what they've learned, link that to public policy, link it to the US foreign policy that has to change, so that not only do we have the right to travel and trade with Cuba, but most importantly, the Cubans need to have the right to be able to travel here. The challenges of the speaking tours with empty chairs, with visas promised and never fulfilled by the US State Department, the intervention and positive intervention with our congressional delegations was because we were advocating and educating them as part of our ongoing intersectional and comprehensive way that we do our work. And without them, we wouldn't have had a number of the amazing speakers that we were able to bring from Cuba directly to the United States. Sometimes they could spend a few months, sometimes they were able to spend a couple of years in major ways. And I'll never forget the opportunity that Professor Norma Guillard had to keynote a National Organization for Women conference in Chicago. And again, blew my sisters in now away, because they really did not know the success and the commitment of what a human rights agenda can accomplish for women's lives. And that's what we're all about. And to conclude, I think because we have learned, as Cindy started, that another world is possible for women and all humanity, and that this technology is making it possible in our present, and I'm afraid for part of our future, to connect, to be in solidarity, especially without an ability to travel and to bring others from Cuba here, that our virtual relations are more important than ever. And as Will says, so listen, and listen to women and elect women and pro-women's rights people in this upcoming election. We can change policy, we can build solidarity, and we can enjoy all of the fun and the friendship and the learnings that we have spent with the last 20 years. Thank you again for this opportunity. Nataka, did you want to add anything else?
I think
you stepped in beautifully. I just didn't want you to be cut off.
Yeah, we are out of time for this section. Yes. Thank you, Nataka and Juanita, for that summation of our work. And again, that's only a 25-minute glimpse of our work. And so we hope you can join us in our continuing work, especially to lift the blockade and to build the US Cuba women's movement. So we were going to have a cultural video, but we're a little bit short of time. And so I think we're going to move right into the section, which is very important to us, and that is on our work around gay, lesbian, transgender, and bisexual rights, and building a movement with the people in that movement. And I am so happy to introduce my travel buddy, my partner in crime, my sister, Moon Vasquez, who we have traveled many times to Cuba. And so she is going to host this section and talk a little bit about that work that is so important. Nataka talked about intersectionality, and this is what this section is about. All right, Moon.
I am honored to be here. I've been working on the National Steering Committee of the US Women-Cuba Collaboration since 2002. But first and foremost, I would like to congratulate the Federation of Cuban Women for 60 years of advancing the international women's agenda. Felicidades. I also would like to extend my heartfelt admiration to the US Women-Cuba Collaboration for 20 years of solidarity work with Cuba and our commitment to our own struggles of advancing women. I am humbled and honored to be part of such an amazing group of women committed to changing the lives of women to the better, and on so many levels. You all are my soul sisters. I am Puerto Rican, and as Jose Martin says, Puerto Rico and Cuba are two wings of the same bird. And as most of you know, part of my heart lives on the island of Cuba. I have spent years working extensively on social and gender justice issues, advancing leadership opportunities for women of color in the international lesbian and bisexual movement. I have led numerous delegations to Cuba so they can see for themselves the advancement and the reality of Cuban women's lives since the victory of the Cuban Revolution and onto the future. This segment, we will hear about the Collaboration's Lesbian Allied Project. We will watch a video titled Cuba by filmmaker Kim Ano. We will move into the presentation of lesbian activist Yet Tamaro Fravel. And also, and that's when we'll wrap up this whole section. The Lesbian Ally Project, it is my pleasure to share with you information about the Collaboration's lesbian allied work. We began our project in 2012. We have grown over the years, forging alliances between the nations of Cuba and the US, building bridges and developing strategies for changes for women's and lesbian rights. Our work promotes international solidarity and models the Cuban Revolution's contemporary movement that supports women's lives, including fighting against homophobia. Lesbians in Cuba and the US share so much, both the strategic and the personal, the work for equality and celebrations. We talk about challenges in the LGBTQI movement and share experiences and historical and current realities in our two countries. We develop knowledge and solidarity together around the joys and the struggles of life as lesbian women. I refer to you now to the slide which outlines our vision and goals. The collaborative vision is to build alliances and solidarity through building bridges of dialogue, education, and strategies, working together to form friendships and lifelong ties, and forging solidarity among lesbians, bisexual, and transgender women from both countries. You can see that our collaborative goals are education, showcasing our work, sharing strategies, advancing international work, expanding the base of our support, sharing histories and movements. Many of our goals have been realized in wonderful ways since the beginning of our collaboration. and we still have work to do on others. This next slide shows a map that features the 8 major lesbian, bisexual, transgender groups across the island of Cuba. Our goal is to have strong working relationships with all 8 groups. In 2014, the collaboration hosted a groundbreaking forum at El Mojunje in Santa Clara, Cuba. The Cultural Center for almost 30 years has been a safe haven to the LGBTQ population of the country. In this meeting drew 18 leaders and members from 8 provinces of the LGBT community across Cuba, along with the US Women's Delegation. That day was simply fantastic. Other activities: in 2015, in Santiago de Cuba, we held a meeting at the Memorial Vilma Espin Center with the director of the center, members of the provincial FMC office, and of ECAP, the Institute of Friendship Between Pueblos, and the LGBT community. In June of 2016, we hosted our first lesbian ally US national speaking tour of Cuban lesbian activist Isel Acosta, the coordinator of Las Isabelas. She spent 2 months in the US visiting 7 cities across the country, visiting community clinics, sharing her work, meeting with LGBTQ groups, presenting at forums and rallies. And finally, Isabel had the honor of representing the Cuban LGBTQ community while traveling with IFCO, Pastors for Peace Caravan, along the West Coast. Since our beginnings in 2012, our work together includes conference presentations and roundtables, presenting together and separately in conferences in Cuba, the US, and in Vancouver, Canada, always educating about anti-homophobia work. In 2017, at the Che Guevara conference in Vancouver, we made a presentation which resulted in a publication in the Canadian magazine Fire These Times by Deb Goldman and myself, called Building Revolution Across Borders. Please have a look at our US and Cuba YouTube channel. It includes recorded interviews of Cuban lesbian leaders, which we plan to add to. Currently, we are beginning to develop a short DVD and chapbook of lesbians speaking for themselves from both countries on stories of lesbian issues, sharing reflections, and living and working together for a future of genuine LGBTQ rights and freedoms in a world without homophobia. We look forward to continuing this important work, and especially look forward to the end of the blockade and the end of COVID, and to the resumption of travel between our 2 countries. This, my friend, is the Cuba-US Lesbian and Allied Project. Now we're gonna move on to screening and viewing the film Cuba. Cuba and now Cuba. The collaboration has the great pleasure of presenting screen sections of Cuba, a documentary by filmmaker Kim Ano about the LGBTQ community of Cuba. Directed and produced by Ano, this film will be released next year. It is edited by Ki-Young Lee and co-produced by Barbara Maggiani. Ano's films have been screened internationally at festivals around the world, where she has been the recipient of numerous fellowships, awards, and prizes. Cuba tells the story of Cuba's LGBTQ community through the stories of 5 activists against the backdrop of their personal histories and the history of the LGBTQ movement in Cuba. We see the ways through art, music, and performance that they celebrate their culture and realize their political work to educate other Cubans about the human rights their community shares with all Cubans. We witnessed a countrywide discussion on Amendment 68, which was not approved in the end, but which opened the door for formal consideration of marriage equality. The documentary's dynamic characters and lush settings and videography powerfully frame the importance of this political, emotional, and historic narrative. Enjoy.
Como debiera ser, porque las leyes amparan a todo el mundo y se dice que todo el mundo es igual y que todo el mundo tiene el mismo derecho, pero en la realidad no es así. Y han habido cambios, pero tenemos que continuar porque cambien. ¿Por qué? Porque el matrimonio igualitario que tantos países del mundo ya lo tienen en Cuba no puede pasar, porque la Constitución
se agolpan otra vez. Mis sentimientos, porque no puedo.
Bueno, muchachitas, las Isabelas nos reunimos hoy acá para analizar y debatir el proyecto de la Constitución de la República de Cuba. Al artículo 68, que va a ser el debate principal de nuestras comunidades, que dice que el matrimonio es la unión voluntaria concertada entre 2 personas. Recuerden que la Constitución anterior decía que era la unión del hombre y la mujer. Y pienso que esto es algo muy importante porque queda libre a 2 personas con actitud legal para que se unan. Y de esta forma pues pudiéramos nosotros, y pienso que este acápite va a ser importante, que se está llevando un gran debate. Yo sé que hay mucha homofobia todavía en nuestro pueblo, de que hay muchos prejuicios, de que las iglesias están incidiendo, pero yo pienso también que es hora de que esto pueda cambiar.
Actualmente no soy miembro de ninguna iglesia. Me considero una persona en búsqueda de la espiritualidad. El artículo 68 fue una bomba atómica que atacó la cultura patriarcal a fondo. Y los cubanos y las cubanas somos machistas, no solamente los hombres. Y entonces todo esto, arraigado a quizás algún vínculo religioso, que cuando las personas quieren acudir a algo para tener razón, meten a Dios en el asunto y hacen una mezcla de varias cosas que a veces no tienen nada que ver. Y entonces, eso fue una de las cosas para mí fuertes.
Porque la Asamblea ha confesado que ellos se dieron cuenta que un alto por ciento de la población de Cuba no estaba a favor de la propuesta del 68. Qué orgullo que la iglesia es una intérprete del pensamiento del pueblo cubano. Nunca antes la iglesia tan compenetrada con el pueblo para interpretar su pensamiento.
Querida Vilma, gracias por ser ejemplo para las mujeres cubanas. Es mi deseo que se concrete constitucionalmente el derecho al matrimonio igualitario y con ello otros derechos inherentes a este. Y como diría el Che, hasta la victoria siempre.
Para seguir adelante necesitamos seguir trabajando en defensa y que se tenga en cuenta el matrimonio igualitario y la adopción para mujeres lesbianas, pues es un reclamo de nuestra comunidad LGBT. Muchas gracias, Vilma.
Moon,
Okay.
you have to, I just want to announce, we're probably going to be 10 minutes over time because the one section ran over. So we need to get to Dai's video. So Moon, go ahead.
Dianis Tamayo Prival is a teacher of English and Spanish as second languages. She is a Cuban who has been living in Mexico since February 2020. Dai is an activist of the sexual and reproductive rights of lesbian and bisexual women, and she is the founder of Las Isabellas social network at its beginning in 2001, and was vice coordinator of the network during the years 2013 to 2017. She has participated in training workshops both locally and nationally, promoted by Cinesex, the Center, the Cuban Center, National Center for Sex Education. She has worked in collaboration on documentaries produced about the LGBTQI community in Cuba. And finally, Dai is a great friend of the US Women-Cuba Collaboration, which highly values its close ties and solidarity of sisterhood with her. I am pleased and honored to present my friend and sister, Dai Tamayo Prival. She also is currently not on the webinar. She sent us her video that she will present through and stuff. So there was some technical difficulties. And so Amy, please put her on. Thank you.
While we're waiting for the video to upload, I can move to some of the action items that we would like you to take, because what is the purpose of education if we are not moved to action? And as the ambassador talked about, the harshness of the US blockade for 60 years demands that we in the United States, it is on our shoulders to change US foreign policy and to lift that blockade, especially in this period of the pandemic. So the collaboration has talked about our work. We want you to join us in our work, sign up for our e-newsletter, our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, our website. And Amy, at the end of this, will be putting up screen. Okay, there it is. And that is all of our contact information. And you can donate to us at this Venmo account, Lilo, which is our fiscal agent. And it's at Lilo-Seattle. Second of all, we hope you will join us in the Saving Lives campaign. And the contact information for the Saving Lives campaign is there. The pandemic is by definition global. And what becomes so clear to us is that Cuba has always had a global perspective when it comes to healthcare. Because this pandemic is global, it is necessary to put aside all our political differences, to call on all medical expertise, and to call for international cooperation in this fight against COVID-19. It is necessary in order to save lives, and that's why that's the name of our campaign. And we all know about the devastating impact that COVID has had in the United States as a result of lies and inaction by the Trump administration. So you can go to that website, look at our 3 demands, calling for cooperation, medical, clinical, and scientific collaboration, but especially to end the US economic and travel sanctions against Cuba, which has also, over the past few months, stopped medical aid to coming to Cuba from China, which is against humanitarian laws. And we have committees focusing on the medical, everyone, resolutions, and media. And please endorse the campaign, show your support for our Saving Lives campaign. Another campaign, which is the Nobel Peace Prize. We want the Nobel Peace Prize presented to Cuba's Harry Reeves International Medical Brigade. Cuba, as many of you might not know, has played a decisive role in many healthcare issues around the world, fighting HIV, AIDS in Africa, fighting the Ebola virus, sending hundreds of healthcare workers and doctors to Africa to fight Ebola. And they have been decisive in other natural disasters in El Salvador and Haiti. And they are now in 34 countries around the world. Cuba's Harry Reeves International Brigade deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. They've saved over 80,000 lives since 2005. And before COVID-19, treated 3.5 million people in 21 countries ravaged by world's disasters and epidemics. Lastly, in terms of collaboration, as part of the US-Cuba-Canada normalization.org group, and we are having a virtual meeting, mini conference from November 13th through the 15th, and it is about lifting the blockade. And in light of who gets elected in November, we will strategize during that weekend about how we are going to lift the blockade in this next period. And I will save our last announcement if we're able to get to the video, Amy. Is it working? There we go. And I think we'll only have time for half of that video, Amy. So go ahead.
My name is Dayanis Tamayo. I'm Cuban from Santiago de Cuba. And I'm currently living in Mexico because I'm attending to a doctoral program here. I have been LGBTIQ+ community activist since 2001, and I have to say that it's an honor to be sharing with you all this space which acknowledges the Federation of Cuban Women's 60th anniversary and the 20 years of work of US Women and Cuba Collaboration. In the first place, I'd like to thank Cindy Domingo and all the US women who has expressed their solidarity with Cuban women and has built strong bonds which turned all of us into an unbreakable sisterhood. My presentation is related to my personal experience as an activist during the past 20 years and is told from my participation as a member of Las Isabelas, a social network linked to the work in favor of the lesbian and bisexual women's rights. A little history. During the 90s, there was already existing the HSH, which stands for Men Who Have Sex with Men. The origin of this network was to support and work together with the gay community, mainly addressing AIDS disease. And there was a very remarkable work in terms of education and prevention, not only of AIDS, but also to sexual transmission diseases as well. So it could be said that it's like the first group addressing sexual diversity in Cuba. Specifically, Las Isabelas' idea began as an informal talk among friends about how to gather together for the recognition of lesbian and bisexual women's rights. There was a request made to the CENESEX, the Cuban Health Institute Center, in charge of Mariela Castro Espin. Isel Calzadilla and other women sent a letter to CENESEX about the idea of conforming a social network which gathered together lesbian and bisexual women as to work on the empowerment and to conform a space to address the concerns and problematics faced by these women. Soon after, two psychologists from CENESEX traveled to Santiago de Cuba to meet this group of women and to hear about what the concerns and interests were. The specialists felt very motivated to support the idea of conforming this social network together with CENESEX as to work in the social issues which affected lesbian and bisexual women. After Las Isabelas Foundation in 2001, the idea of having a social network addressing lesbians and bisexual women's social rights was of great interest for other women around the country, and almost in all the Cuban provinces and municipalities nowadays, there are social networks whose work addresses women's rights and concerns. I want to highlight that all these groups are supported by CENESEX. These lesbian and bisexual women groups have strongly worked against homophobia along the last 20 years. Some of the main activities developed are the participation in national and local workshops to empower women in terms of civil, sexual, and reproductive rights. The network has stretched its working objectives with the support of some other social networks who has been created by professionals like lawyers, psychologists, physicians, in order to work together in guiding and supporting lesbian and bisexual women. We have been participating in different social activities for greater visibility of the network. We have addressed topics like the women's interest in reproduction, in legal union recognition, in topics like imprisoned gay people, same rights, particularly for the right of lesbian and bisexual women to have these intimate spaces with their couples as heterosexuals have. Also, we have worked on specific women personal experiences concerning work harassment as a form of discrimination. And Las Isabelas and other women groups are not only a space for training and empowering in social rights or other educative communities activities, but it's also a space to give voice to lesbian and bisexual women concerns and experiences.
So we're sorry that we're not able to show the full film. We'll post it on our Facebook and our YouTube. And we want to thank Dai for sending that to us. So we're sorry we're a little bit over time. You know, our enthusiasm about our work has gotten to us. And as you can see, we're trying to build a multiracial, multi-generational movement here in the US to reflect what we have seen and experienced in Cuba. So I want to thank the ambassador especially for joining us. I want to thank our National Steering Committee members who are on board. One of the women that you haven't met, who she has been at the center of our work, Caridad Dusa Morales. But you will see her in our next webinar, along with Nataka Moore and other women, as we move into the issue of building solidarity between Black women in the United States and Black women in Cuba. The challenges that these women face in terms of racism, in terms of patriarchy, and as well as how can we build a stronger international women's movement, especially amongst Black women. So we hope that you will attend our next webinar next month, and we'll let you know when that is. So, but I want to thank also Gretel for sending us her video, and we hope that one day we'll be able to meet face to face so that we can exchange our experiences directly. And maybe that will be in Cuba, and we hope that many of you will join us on our next delegation when we can travel. Thank you again to Amy Leong for her work on this. And my last announcement is a fun announcement, and so I'll ask Amy to put up the poster. Lastly, I want to invite you to a special event tonight that was organized by my dear friend and extraordinary National Steering Committee member, Catherine Murphy, who is the producer of Maestra, the documentary on the successful 1961 literacy campaign in Cuba. And this event was also organized by Bill Martinez and sponsored by Hot House Global. So grab a bite to eat, join us at 5 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, 8 o'clock Eastern Time, to a tribute to the legendary singer-songwriter Silvio Rodriguez, a 26-minute documentary film by Catherine Murphy that weaves archival footage of the Cuban literacy campaign and a rare exclusive interview with Silvio about when he volunteered at the age of 14 for the literacy campaign. And then afterwards, a host of legendary Nueva Trova artists will pay tribute to Silvio by performing a selection of his songs. The event will be exclusively streamed via the internet, via Twitch, and I think Catherine has put in the chat how you can go on there. And the event is free. But of course, we're always looking for donations to continue the work of this project that Catherine has, for 10 years, has worked on in terms of educating the world about the role that Cuba has played in eradicating illiteracy in the world. So thank you again for attending, and we hope to see you at our next webinar, and we hope that you will join us in the future on another delegation. So thank you, especially to the ambassador and all of the participants of the National Steering Committee of US Women and Cuba.
Thank you for the unwavering solidarity with Cuba. Thank you so much. We owe you all the solidarity that you gave us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night. Good afternoon.